There's a phrase that your father or mother said to you in childhood that still echoes in your mind today. A single phrase that completely shaped how you see yourself, how you relate to others, and how you believe the world sees you. Maybe it was, "You're a failure. Nobody will put up with you," or "You only bring me problems." What you didn't know is that these words weren't said out of anger or in a bad moment. They were precise psychological weapons calculated to break your self-esteem and keep you under total control. Dr. Gabor Maté revolutionized our understanding of childhood trauma by revealing how narcissistic parents use specific insults as tools of domination. Today, you're going to discover exactly what the 7 most devastating insults that narcissistic parents use are, why they work so well at destroying a child's mind, and most importantly, how to recognize these patterns to finally free yourself from this emotional prison. If you still feel a tightness in your chest when someone criticizes you, if you have difficulty believing you deserve love, or if you constantly seek approval from others, prepare yourself. What you're about to discover in the next few minutes will explain decades of suffering and show you the path to your true emotional freedom. Because the truth is that you were never the problem. The problem was always the poison they injected into your mind. The first category of insults that narcissistic parents use is perhaps the most devastating of all. Insults that destroy your perception of reality. Dr. Gabor Maté calls this the murder of the child's inner truth. The first insult in this category is, "You're too sensitive." Seems harmless, doesn't it? But this phrase carries deadly poison. When a child expresses pain, fear, or sadness, and the narcissistic parent responds with, "You're too sensitive," they're doing 2 terrible things at the same time, completely invalidating the child's emotional experience and teaching that feeling is wrong. The result, you grow up thinking your emotions are defective, that you overreact to everything, and that you need to hide what you feel to be accepted. How many times have you caught yourself thinking, "Am I overreacting?" when someone hurts you? The second insult is even more subtle. "It was just a joke. You don't know how to have fun." Imagine a child being humiliated in front of others, and when they express their pain, they hear this. The narcissistic parent is disguising cruelty as humor, making the child feel guilty for not being able to take a joke. But the most destructive insult in this category is, "You're imagining things." This is pure gaslighting. When a child questions their parents' abusive behavior or points out inconsistencies, hearing, "You're imagining things," is devastating. The child learns to doubt their own perception, their own memory, their own sanity. Have you ever questioned whether you really experienced something traumatic or if you're making up the suffering? This doubt didn't come from nowhere. It was planted by someone who needed you to doubt your own truth to maintain control over you. Dr. Gabor Maté explains that children who grow up hearing these insults develop what he calls emotional amnesia. They lose the ability to trust their own feelings and perceptions. Write in the comments what city you're watching this video from. I want to know where the brave people are who are willing to face these painful truths. But if you think these insults are cruel, wait until you discover the second category. What comes next will show how narcissistic parents use what should be most sacred, love, as a weapon of destruction. The second category of insults that narcissistic parents use is even more perverse because it transforms love into a currency of exchange. These are insults based on guilt and shame, and they function like true emotional bombs that explode for decades in adult life. The first insult in this category is devastating. It's always all about you, isn't it? When a child expresses a need, a desire, or simply shares something important that happened to them, hearing this phrase is like receiving a slap to the soul. The narcissistic parent is teaching that having needs is selfishness, that talking about yourself is narcissism. The result? You grow up feeling guilty for taking up space, for having opinions, for simply existing. How many times have you stopped asking for help because you didn't want to bother anyone? How many times have you stayed quiet to not seem selfish? The second insult is brutal emotional blackmail. After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me. Dr. Gabor Maté explains that this insult transforms parental love into an eternal debt. The child learns that every care received must be paid for with total obedience and infinite gratitude. This creates adults who feel eternally indebted, who can't set boundaries because they owe their parents, who live trying to pay back a love that should have been free. Have you ever felt guilty for saying no to your parents? For making a decision they didn't approve of? But the most psychologically destructive insult in this category is, "You'll regret this when I'm dead." This phrase is emotional blackmail that uses death as a weapon. The narcissistic parent is saying, if you don't do what I want now, you'll carry this guilt forever. Children who grow up hearing this develop a paralyzing terror of disappointing their parents. They become adults who live in constant rescue mode, always trying to make their parents happy, always afraid it will be too late to earn the love that was never given unconditionally. Dr. Gabor Maté discovered that these guilt and shame insults create what he calls the eternal debtor complex. People who spend their entire lives trying to deserve love they should have already had. The fourth insult in this category will shock you with its psychological brutality. I sacrificed everything for you. When a parent says this, they're making the child feel like a burden, like they're responsible for their parents' unhappiness. But there's an even more devastating category that we're going to see now. Prepare yourself, because what comes next attacks directly who you are. The third category of insults that narcissistic parents use are direct attacks on the child's character. These insults don't criticize behaviors, they destroy identity. Dr. Gabor Maté discovered that these attacks create wounds in the soul that bleed for decades. The first insult in this category is demolishing. You're a disappointment. Note that it's not, you disappointed me this time, or this behavior disappointed me. It's, you are a disappointment. The narcissistic parent is attacking the essence of the child, saying that they, as a person, are fundamentally flawed. Children who grow up hearing this develop a deep sense of inadequacy. They become adults who live trying to prove they're not a disappointment, but never manage to convince themselves of this because the wound is in their identity, not in their behavior. Have you ever felt like nothing you did was enough? Like you were always falling short of what they expected from you? This feeling isn't your truth. It's the echo of a cruel insult planted in your childhood. The second insult is equally destructive. You're just like your father, or you're just like your mother. Always referring to the parent who is viewed negatively. The narcissistic parent is saying the child carries within them the bad characteristics of someone they despise. Dr. Gabor Maté explains that this insult creates profound identity confusion. The child grows up not knowing who they really are, always trying to escape from a negative inheritance that was artificially stuck to them. The third insult in this category is particularly cruel. You always ruin everything. The word always here is a psychological bomb. The narcissistic parent isn't criticizing a specific mistake. They're defining the child as someone who is fundamentally destructive. This creates adults who are terrified of taking initiatives, of participating in important projects, of getting involved in serious relationships. Deep down, they carry the belief that they're going to ruin everything, even when trying to do their best. The fourth insult goes straight to the heart of self-image. You're so selfish. When a child expresses a legitimate need and hears this, they learn that having their own desires is morally wrong. Dr. Gabor Maté discovered that this creates adults who can't set healthy boundaries because they were taught that caring about themselves is selfishness. The last insult in this category is devastating. Nobody cares about your opinion. With this phrase, the narcissistic parent is saying that the child's thoughts and feelings are irrelevant, that they have no value as a thinking being. But there's a fourth category that goes beyond cruelty. What comes now are insults that attack the basic right to exist. The fourth and most devastating category of insults that narcissistic parents use are direct attacks on the child's right to exist. Dr. Gabor Maté classifies these insults as psychological murder because they don't attack behaviors or characteristics. They deny the fundamental value of the child's life. The first insult in this category is brutal in its simplicity. "You're lucky we put up with you." With this phrase, the narcissistic parent is saying that the child's existence is a burden, that their presence is tolerated out of kindness, not out of love. The child learns that their existence is conditional on others' patience. This creates adults who live in constant excessive gratitude, who feel guilty for taking up space, who believe they need to deserve others' love and acceptance. Have you ever felt like you were a burden to the people who love you? This feeling isn't real. It's the echo of this cruel insult. The second insult is even more isolating. Nobody else would put up with you. Dr. Gabor Maté explains that this insult creates toxic emotional dependence. The child learns that their parents are the only people in the world capable of tolerating them, that outside that house they would be rejected by everyone. This programs the child to accept any kind of abusive treatment because they believe they have no other options. It creates adults who remain in toxic relationships because they're terrified of being alone, because they deeply believe that nobody else would put up with them. But the most devastating insult in this category attacks the deepest core of the human soul. You're impossible to love. When a child hears this, something dies inside them. The narcissistic parent isn't just criticizing. They're declaring that the child is fundamentally unworthy of love. Dr. Gabor Maté discovered that this insult creates what he calls the primordial wound, a deep conviction that there's something fundamentally wrong with the person that makes them impossible to truly love. Children who grow up with this wound become adults who sabotage relationships before being abandoned, who can't accept genuine love because they believe it's temporary, that when the person discovers who they really are, they'll leave. The fourth insult continues this destruction. You'll never be good enough. It's not, you need to improve, or you can do better. It's a definitive sentence that condemns the child to an eternal and impossible search for adequacy. The last insult in this category is simple but absolutely devastating. You're worthless. With these four words, the narcissistic parent is completely denying the child's intrinsic value as a human being. But why do these insults leave such deep marks? The answer will shock you. Maybe you're wondering, why do simple words have so much power over me? Why do they still affect me after so many years? The answer that Dr. Gabor Maté discovered will explain decades of suffering. You might not even know where it came from. A child's brain between 0 and 7 years old is in a state that neuroscientists call theta waves, the same state as deep hypnosis. This means that everything said to a child at this age doesn't pass through the critical filter of the conscious mind. It goes straight to the subconscious and becomes absolute truth. When a narcissistic parent says, "You're impossible to love," to a 4-year-old child, these words aren't processed as an opinion or as something said in the heat of the moment. They're recorded as scientific fact in the child's mind. It's as if the entire universe were declaring this truth. Dr. Gabor Maté explains that these insults do more than hurt. They completely reformat the child's identity. They create what he calls survival programming. The child learns that to survive emotionally in that environment, they need to accept these definitions about themselves. If the father says, "You always ruin everything," the child thinks, "If I accept that I'm like this, maybe he'll stop being angry with me." If the mother says, "You're selfish," the child decides, "If I never ask for anything again, maybe she'll love me." This process creates what Dr. Gabor Maté calls the false self, a personality built entirely to survive emotional abuse. The child's true self, curious, spontaneous, full of life, is buried so deep that they forget it exists. And here's the cruelest part. These insults don't just shape how the child sees themselves, they shape how they believe the world sees them. If their own parents, who should love them unconditionally, say they're impossible to love, then obviously all other people will think this too. The child develops what Dr. Gabor Maté calls a self-fulfilling prophecy. They start behaving in ways that confirm these insults because they believe this is their true nature. If they believe they always ruin everything, they unconsciously sabotage their own opportunities. But there's something even more devastating happening. These insults don't just destroy self-esteem, they create toxic emotional dependence. The child becomes addicted to their parents' approval precisely because of the insults. They think, if I can prove I'm not a disappointment, I'll finally receive the love I deserve. And so begins a desperate search that can last a lifetime. But Dr. Gabor Maté made a revolutionary discovery about how to break this cycle. Dr. Gabor Maté made a shocking discovery. Children who grow up hearing these insults develop what he calls addiction to validation from aggressors. It's one of the most powerful and destructive addictions that exist, but nobody talks about it. It works like this. When a child is constantly insulted by their parents, they develop a desperate hunger for approval from these same people. It's as if the brain said, if I can make these people who hurt me love me, then I've proven I'm worthy of love. This explains why so many adults remain trapped trying to earn the love of narcissistic parents who have already proven incapable of loving in a healthy way. It's like trying to get water from a stone, but the addiction to validation is so strong that the person keeps trying. Dr. Gabor Maté explains that this addiction works exactly like any other dependency. When the child occasionally receives a crumb of approval from the narcissistic parent, maybe a "you did well this time," the brain releases dopamine as if it were a drug. But here's the problem. This approval is rare and unpredictable, which creates what psychologists call an intermittent reinforcement schedule. It's the same mechanism that makes gambling so addictive. You never know when you're going to win, so you keep trying indefinitely. The result is devastating. The child grows up and becomes an adult who spends their entire life trying to prove to their parents that they're not a disappointment, that they're not impossible to love, that they don't ruin everything. They live in a frantic search for validation that may never come, and even when it comes, it's never enough. Dr. Gabor Maté discovered that when narcissistic parents finally give some approval, they frequently withdraw it right after, with comments like, "Don't get used to it," or "Don't let it go to your head." This keeps the adult person on an eternal emotional roller coaster, always waiting for the next moment of approval, always afraid of losing it again. But the cruelest aspect of this addiction is that it generalizes. The person doesn't seek validation only from their parents. They seek validation from any authority figure, from any person who reminds them of their parents, from any situation that recreates the toxic family dynamic. This is why so many people get involved in abusive relationships that reproduce exactly the dynamic they lived in childhood. Unconsciously, they're trying to solve the original trauma by earning the love of someone who treats them badly. Dr. Gabor Maté calls this traumatic repetition compulsion. The person recreates the trauma, hoping to finally have a different ending. But there's a way to break this cycle. The discovery that changed everything. Dr. Gabor Maté spent years studying people who managed to completely free themselves from toxic childhood programming. What he discovered revolutionized the treatment of family traumas and can change your life today. The most important discovery was this: you don't need your parents' approval to heal. In fact, continuing to seek this approval is exactly what keeps you trapped. It's like trying to get out of a hole by digging deeper. Dr. Gabor Maté discovered that real healing happens when you finally accept a painful but liberating truth. Your parents may never change. They may never recognize the harm they did. They may never apologize. They may never give you the love you always wanted. And that's okay, because you don't need that anymore. The most powerful technique that Dr. Gabor Maté developed is what he calls internal reparenting. You learn to give yourself the love, validation, and care that you should have received in childhood. You become the loving parent you always needed. This isn't self-love in a superficial way. It's literally rewriting your neurological programming. It's looking at that wounded inner child and saying, "I believe in you. I love you unconditionally. You don't need to prove anything to deserve my love." Dr. Gabor Maté teaches a specific technique. Every time you hear the internal voice repeating one of these toxic insults, "You're a disappointment. You ruin everything," you'll stop and say consciously, "This isn't my voice. This is my father's, mother's voice. I choose not to believe this anymore." Then you actively substitute it with a loving truth. "I am worthy of love. I deserve respect. I am capable of good things." In the beginning, it might feel false because your brain was programmed to believe the opposite. But Dr. Gabor Maté proved that with consistent repetition, you can completely reprogram these beliefs. The second revolutionary technique is what he calls energetic cutting with aggressors. This doesn't necessarily mean cutting physical contact, but it means stopping seeking emotional validation from them. It means accepting that they are emotionally limited and are not the source of your healing. Dr. Gabor Maté discovered that when you stop trying to convince your parents that you're worthy of love, something magical happens. You finally have energy to build healthy relationships with people who are capable of truly loving you. But there's a specific moment in the healing journey that determines whether you'll free yourself completely or remain trapped. It's the moment of the final decision. Dr. Gabor Maté identified that there's a specific moment in every person's healing journey who grew up with narcissistic parents. It's the moment he calls the final decision, when you need to choose between your healing and your fantasy. The fantasy is this: that one day your parents will change, will recognize the harm they did, will apologize on their knees, and finally give you the love you always wanted. It's the hope that keeps you trapped, always coming back to try one more time, believing that this time it will be different. Dr. Gabor Maté discovered that this fantasy is the last obstacle to total freedom. While you maintain this hope, a part of you continues being that wounded child, waiting for daddy or mommy to finally love them. The final decision is this: you choose to let go of the fantasy and embrace reality. The reality that your parents are limited human beings, possibly with personality disorders, who did the maximum they were capable of, even if that maximum was destructive to you. This doesn't mean forgiving them or accepting the abuse. It means accepting that they won't change and that your healing doesn't depend on them. It means mourning the childhood you didn't have and choosing to create the adult life you deserve. Dr. Gabor Maté teaches a powerful exercise for this moment. You write a letter that you'll never send to your parents, saying everything you needed to say, all the pain, all the anger, all the disappointment. Then you write a second letter, this time to yourself, making the commitment to be the loving parent you always needed. The moment of the final decision is terrifying, because it means letting go of the last toxic emotional connection with your parents. It means accepting that you're truly alone in the journey of creating who you want to be. But Dr. Gabor Maté discovered that it's exactly this solitude that frees you. When you stop seeking validation from your parents, when you stop trying to prove you're not a disappointment or impossible to love, You finally have energy to discover who you really are underneath all these wounds. It's like taking off clothes that became too small decades ago. At first you feel naked and vulnerable, but then you realize you can finally breathe. The question that Dr. Gabor Maté asks all his patients is this: if your parents never change, if they never give you the love you want, how do you choose to live the rest of your life? Your answer to this question determines whether you'll be free or remain trapped. And now you have all the tools to make this choice. Dr. Gabor Maté always ends his work with people who suffered emotional abuse in childhood the same way, showing that real healing is not only possible, it's inevitable when you apply the right tools. If you made it this far, it's because something inside you is ready for real change, ready to stop living as a wounded child, disguised as an adult, and start living as the powerful human being worthy of love that you always were. First, understand this. Every time you hear those toxic voices in your head, you're a disappointment. You ruin everything. Nobody puts up with you. You have a choice. You can believe them as you have for decades, or you can recognize them for what they really are: lies planted by people who were hurt and hurt you. Second, start practicing internal reparenting today. Every morning, before doing anything else, look in the mirror and say to yourself, "I love you. I believe in you. You deserve good things." It will feel strange at first because you were programmed to believe the opposite. But Dr. Gabor Maté proved that 21 days of conscious repetition begin to rewrite your neurological programming. Third, stop seeking validation from the people who hurt you. Every time you feel that urgency to prove to your parents that you're not impossible to love, remember, you're already lovable. The problem was never you. The problem was always their inability to love in a healthy way. Dr. Gabor Maté discovered that when you stop trying to win the love of your aggressors, you become a magnet for people who are capable of truly loving you. You attract healthy relationships because you finally believe you deserve them. Your life can change completely starting today, not in months or years, starting today. Because today you understood that those cruel insults were never about you. They were about wounded people trying to break you because they themselves were broken. But you're not broken. You never were. You were always worthy of love, respect, and happiness. And now you have the map to find your way back home, to yourself. If this video helped you understand decades of suffering and showed a path to freedom, subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who needs to hear this. Because everyone deserves to free themselves from the chains of the past and live the extraordinary life that was always their birthright.